All right. Give us a little background on Airbnb.
Yeah, so I am a product manager within our homes platform team. So I lead a part of the homes platform team within Airbnb. Just to explain, like what that means is Airbnb is organized around businesses. So homes is obviously what everybody knows Airbnb for, which is basically booking any homes or listing on the platform. That's the biggest business unit in Airbnb. But we also have, if you go to Airbnb, you have experiences now. So that's also another team. And we have a couple of other smaller teams. So I'm part of the homes organization, specifically focused on homes platform. And what homes platform means is Airbnb is evolving from what was a single product company to like a multi-product company. So it's our job to make it a platform so that we can scale and build new products on top of what we have already.
Got it. So we're going to dive deep on some of that in a minute. But One of the things that is part of this, and those of you guys who were here last time know, I really like to dig into like why people are in product management and what the road that you took to get here. So maybe tell us about the journey that led you from where you started to product management.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I have met a lot of PMs in my life, and everybody has kind of a different path. So my path is kind of pretty complicated. I started out as a software engineer. Was working on full stack sort of Java code, and then I went to business school with John, and this was like a few years back, and really business schools were not really prepared to train people to become product managers and succeed in the tech industry. It was still kind of very traditional, and their focus was on investment banking or become a consultant. So I was kind of indoctrinated there, like, hey, you have to be a banker or a consultant to be successful. So I went on the consulting route. I worked at Deloitte for a few years. At management consulting, it was really good for me to understand the business side of things, to get a lot of insights on how you operate, how you solve problems. And then from there, my boss in Deloitte, he joined SuccessFactors as a product manager. And then he was like, hey, why don't you come and try this? I was ready to move out of consulting, traveled a lot in my 3 years. So I was ready to move out of there. So I said, I'll give it a shot. I didn't really know a whole lot about PM at that point. So started from there, spent 5 years there. SuccessFactors got acquired by SAP at that point. And then, it was time for me to move on when it became much larger organization and see what Airbnb has about. So that's kind of my path, engineering to consulting to product management.
Cool. So one thing I didn't say, format of this, like you guys can interrupt us at any time. So if you have questions, if he's talking about something, you're like, hey, I'm like experiencing that same problem right now. Like, can we talk about my problems? You can feel free to shift the conversation wherever you want to go. So feel free to interrupt. I'll open it up every now and then as well. But if I'm not, then just feel free to chime in or raise your hand and we'll flag it. But you mentioned SuccessFactors. So very different, right? B2B versus B2C.
Yep.
So maybe could you say a little bit about product management, the difference between being a product manager in those two different contexts?
Yeah, actually, it's very different in B2B and a consumer-focused product management function. I think I can think about a few differences that are very stark to me when I started working at Airbnb. The first was the use of data. I think in B2B, the use of data is not as pervasive, is not as universal. It's also kind of very different type of data set that we look at. Versus a consumer company like Airbnb is very data-driven, experiment-driven. Any features you see on Airbnb.com has gone through like iterations and experiments before we kind of land on that feature is released. While in the B2B world, we didn't really have an option to run experiments because you cannot really do that with client data. You have to give them notice, so you can't really do a lot of that. Some of that has changed now because I see like what I call the SaaS 2.0 companies with like Slack and Dropbox. They can do some of that, but traditional B2B companies like Salesforce and Oracle and Workday and SuccessFactors, we didn't really have a way to do that. The other big difference is, how we did requirements gathering in a B2B company was sort of triangulation between you get a feedback from your larger customers, from your community, and then sales organizations used to play a big role in directing that as well, right? Versus how you do product management at Airbnb, a lot of it is research, a lot of it is experiment driven, a lot of it is based upon strategy and competitor analysis, right? So there's this fundamental difference between how you do product management between B2B and Airbnb. And then there are many other differences. The other one I would point to is release schedule. In B2B companies, we had sort of dedicated windows of product releases when we would roll out products. And SuccessFactors we used to do quarterly. I think Salesforce does 3 releases a year. Workday does 2 releases a year. So this varies well. Airbnb is continuous release. So you release every day, every week. So whenever it's time for you to go, we kind of roll that out. So some very fundamental differences in how we operate.
Got it. Yeah, I would put GLIDR in that, sort of SaaS 2.0 camp, in that we're sort of following that Slack model of being a more consumer-driven SaaS company, but we still, when we get into larger enterprises, run into those same need to like pre-communicate changes there. Otherwise, we're changing people's workflows every day.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to point on that, I think SaaS 2.0 is a really great business model if you want to build a B2B company now. All those SuccessFactors and Salesforce and Workday, they all kind of started in that model where you build a product and then you have your Salesforce go and pitch and sell that product, which is a very, very hard model to do now. Because you need to have relationship with buying organizations, you need to have relationship with procurement managers, and those organizations, people who actually do your contracting in a big. So if you're going to go and sell your product to like Ford or General Motors, SuccessFactors to do that, they already have existing relationship with like Oracle and SAP. So it's very hard to break into that, right? And you need a lot more beyond just a product. You need a lot more other things to break into that and make them pay for that product. So the SaaS 2.0 model, where you just let users try it, and then you work with IT organizations and procurement organizations to get your business into it. I think it's much more disruptive, and I would say anybody looking to start a B2B business, that's the way to go.
Okay. Let me get a sense, because I didn't ask the audience. How many of you guys work for like B2B companies? How many work for like B2C companies? How many work for just like government contractors, something totally different? All right, just a few of those. Nice. And then how many of you guys work for like larger companies versus smaller companies? Like larger, meaning like got more than 1,000 people. All right, and then under 50 people? Anybody there? All right, cool. So there's a kind of a mix of things we can talk to there. So maybe, we like to focus this because of, the nature of GLIDR. We like to focus on, building better products. And part of that is the process of figuring out the right products to build. So how did you find that the process of doing discovery work and research and and you talked a little bit about experiments, actually differed it at SuccessFactors versus Airbnb?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned before, building product with SuccessFactors is kind of a triangulation effort. It's trying to thread the needle between what we are hearing from thousands of customers, right? And everyone has a specific need, slightly different from everyone else. So if you ask 1,000 customers, they will give you 1,000 distinct requirements. So the arc there was trying to find a common arc across all of these 1,000 customers and trying to figure out what will satisfy 80% of this request, right? And build something that is configurable that satisfies that. So we kind of start from there. That kind of gives us an insight into what the need in the market is, and then take that into validation, interviews, and then you get your research team to go and actually ask people, interview them, and then you get into the stage of building beta products and alpha products and testing that and ultimately rolling that out. So it's kind of that process where you have to talk to a lot of people and build something that is useful across many different businesses, right? That's very important for a B2B business at that point. One of the interesting conversations I used to have with our research team is, when we decide that we're going to build something, should we go and do our research, do our survey to only our customers, or should we do that for the general population, right? And it's kind of a very there are conflicts on how you answer that. Our research team strongly believe that we should go and talk to anybody, right? Not just people who are familiar with our product, but sometimes you can get into a debate whether that's the right thing to do. Because then when you go and ask people who haven't used your product, they would come up with ideas and suggestions that you may have already implemented, right? So I would say, a mix of people who have used your product versus people who haven't even seen GLIDR. That's kind of the way we approach that at the end. So that's what we did in SuccessFactors, and then we would build like a beta product, and we would get a group of customers, probably a small group of 10 to 20 customers to test that out, and that's how we roll it. Airbnb, as I said, many aspects of Airbnb are similar in the sense the host community plays a big part in driving their roadmap. There is a big host community, and their voices are heard, and they play a big part in driving their roadmap. We have a huge research team who's constantly doing research in different areas of focus. That translates into product needs as well. And then you get into experimentation, and we launch features, and we're constantly A/B testing those features as we go along. One interesting I would mention is Airbnb also has a big B2B side also. Actually, if you look at any consumer company, there is a business-to-business side too. Like for example, in Airbnb, if you book something, you would often see turnkey is one of your hosts. So we have like professional property management companies who put their properties on Airbnb also. So we have to build systems for them as well.
Got it. So I'm going to go back 1 second, because this is actually, I don't know if you guys have dealt with this, but we're currently dealing with this at our company. So we're building a feature. It's a fairly new workflow for us. It's a fairly important workflow, and we currently are having this debate around, to what degree should we be talking to people who are current users of Glider versus people who are maybe new to Glider? Because obviously we want this new feature to be able to attract new users, right? At the same time, it can sometimes be hard to help them situate. We need to sort of understand the way this sits within the context of what we already do, and that sometimes existing users are better for that. How did you find that you were making the decisions? And I guess I'd also say, for those people working in smaller companies and maybe actually doing this without a research team, how would you, if you had to do this right now, be making those types of decisions?
I mean, I have done, SuccessFactors done a research team for the first 2 years I worked at, so I did a lot of that research for them. I think how I would think about, to answer your first question, whether to go and meet with existing customers or people who haven't even seen Glider, is that what is the objective of the feature you're building, right? Is it an incremental improvement upon an existing feature you have? Is it like some sort of improvement upon something that you already have? Then it's hugely beneficial to talk to people who've already used it, right? But if you're trying to expand the market, if you're trying to introduce a new feature that nobody has seen, completely new line of business, a new line of product, it makes sense to go and talk to people who haven't seen products. So I would kind of differentiate between those two things and kind of determine what my objective is. Is my objective to introduce something new as well? And then how I did it, so I launched a product called Presentations in SuccessFactors, which was essentially like a reporting product where we take all our employee data and you copy little reports, and it creates like a presentation for yourself. And I personally went and spoke with at least 100 customers to see what their pain points are. So we would design survey questions, and I would go and test the survey questions with customers, keep refining that. So if you don't have a research team, just make sure that you speak with customers every day, multiple times a day, and you essentially do your research. And I think there are some survey tools which you can use also to craft good quality surveys.
You guys have questions so far? No?
I actually have one.
Yeah.
How do you, when you're constantly going out to customers to get feedback and test stuff out, how do you make sure that you're not burning them out, that you're not asking the same people over and over again?
Yeah.
Do you have a panel of people who sort of opt into this, or are you just going out to people randomly?
No, so what we did was we built tiered customer segments, right? So some of our most valuable and advanced customers, we create an advisory board for a very sort of select group of customers, right? And then there's it's almost like a concentric circle, right? Then there's a slightly larger group of customers who represent a diverse set of industries or geography, right? And then there is a large group of customers who we don't really interact with, but they're engaged in our community sites, so you can reach out to them if you want to do some broad experimentation. So that's how we did it, so that you don't, you're not sort of randomly reaching out to people. So those advisory board customers, we described their representation, we described their roles of responsibility, and they had to opt into that. And we had periodic meetings with them, touch points with them. We tested ideas with them. We got ideas from them. So they were kind of the first step of validation. And then once something comes up through that channel, then we use that to go and reach out to second and the third tier set of customers. And it was important for us to keep all of these tiers fluid, So we got fresh ideas, we got new people in there. It's also competitive from a customer point of view, is I want to participate in that, I want to shape the roadmap. So that's how we kind of did that.
And did you guys have, and this question applies to any of the companies you've worked for, did you guys have, where did you keep the record of all that activity? So if I looked up, if Dipesh was one of my research participants, could I look Dipesh up and see how many times I've gone to him for feedback before?
Not really.
Yeah.
I think we kind of roughly knew who we were tapping onto. And I didn't really see any pushback from customers if we asked them, more often than not. In fact, customers actually love to give us feedback. I'm sure this is your experience as well. If you have a customer who likes your product, they're invested in it, they love to give you feedback. So you can reach out to them. It's not something I've usually seen we've got a lot of pushback from. So we never really tracked. But we also had this in mind that when we did this product advisory board meetings, we didn't do more than like twice a year. We did one in North America, we did one in Europe, so we can get broad representation from different type of customers. So we kept those things in mind so that we're not making people fly out to the US every other month and taking up those times. So you have to be mindful of that. But generally I've seen customers are very receptive to this and they're very willing to give us feedback.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We actually had, to that same point, we had early on with GLIDR, we had a group, in-tech product team, cross-functional product team from Berkshire Hathaway, and we actually flew out, and what was really amazing to me was like, these guys were using our product pretty extensively, but they actually pulled like senior leaders, like VP of engineering, head of design, and they spent an entire day hanging out with us and just giving us feedback. They even pulled engineers off what they were doing and came in to give feedback on the process, which you would think would be incredibly wasteful, but they considered it an investment in the process.
Absolutely, and it helps them solve the problems that they're facing, right? So they're kind of invested in the relationship and make your product better for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you mentioned a feature that you were launching before, but could you walk us through something at SuccessFactors, and then we'll start moving on to Airbnb, but something that you took from sort of the ground up, and it could be something that didn't succeed or something that did succeed, and I'd love to just kind of hear the process that you took it through, and the things you might do differently along what you thought went well and didn't go well, and how it worked.
Maybe I should just kind of complete that experience I was talking about in presentations. Mm-hmm. So the idea of the product came from, just kind of observing how our customers operate. I find that's probably one of the best ways to solve problems, when you see people and you can see that the process that they're already doing, and you try to figure out how it can improve that process, right? So one of the things we observed talking to our customers is they have this process of collecting employee data and presenting that to the board of directors or the senior leadership meeting. Every quarter, every month, people would do that, and many customers had to employ consultants to create those reports, right? To create employee reports, to create headcount reports, to create recruiting reports. And so there would be consultants working for them for a month to come up with those reports, and it would be incredibly expensive for them to prepare for a board of directors meeting. And then it occurred to us that, hey, most of the data is already available at SAP Systems, right? Why don't we automate that process that helps people generate those reports and make them into presentations within a few seconds, instead of them having to employ all these people to build out those reports and dashboards for them. So that's where the idea of presentation originated. So once we had that idea, we then went on a massive validation tour, and as I was saying, I spoke with 50 to 100 customers, getting their feedback and try to get, does everybody have a similar process? It turns out most people have a similar process with some variation of it. And the variation, what we found out, was mostly in the content that they would use to present. Some people would present diversity numbers, others would not. Some people would use, headcount growth. Some people would use performance numbers. Some people use compensation equity numbers. So its content kind of varied. So the trick was to try to figure out how we can have a sort of, again, so the unifying arc that enables most customers. So we build sort of common templates that people can use and pull data and create the presentations. We then built a small prototype with a small set of templates, launched it to 15, 20 customers in the beginning, got great feedback, looked like a great idea, got good validation, went full force, worked 6 months and launched the product. It's interesting because once we launched it, I was looking at our enablement numbers, and it's kind of off the charts. Like thousands of customers enabled it within the first month of launching the product. But in a couple months, we kind of noticed that although the enablement was pretty high, the usage kind of remained flat, right? People were not creating a lot of presentations. People are not using the tool quite a lot. So it was kind of a learning experience that, hey, even though your research, your validation, everything went well, when you kind of get into that, your usage still wasn't there, and they were like, and then we kind of delved deep into what those reasons were.
Did you eventually find a way to sort of drive the growth of that, or was it something that you let sort of remain flat, or what did you do?
Yeah. So like when we saw that the usage was kind of flat, again, went back to those customers asking why are people not using a product that was initially validated. And there are a number of reasons that came out of it, like which weren't very apparent when we were building the tool. Like and this is sort of base fears. One of the things that customers feared is like a CHRO, when they're presenting to the board of directors, they often don't want to take chances on Wi-Fi because they're often on this like they're sometimes in these hotels or locations where the Wi-Fi is unstable, so they want to present something from a SaaS system, right? They want an offline product that they can control, right? Other things that we discovered is that people are so selective about the template. So if somebody has used a template for a CEO, they don't want to change that template. Even if it's a minor change, they don't want to do that. They want to stick to that template, right? So those were some of the concerns I had. So we built tools around making those templates even more flexible, but also allowing people to upload their own slides, like literally PowerPoint slides. You can upload that, and you can use that in whatever way you want. You can mark up on them. The usage picked up. But if I was, after iteration of that, I was thinking if I have to do it all over again, probably do it in a different way, where we'll probably build a plugin on top of Microsoft Office or PowerPoint so that people can stick with what they have versus relying on a SaaS platform to do that.
That makes sense. When you first made that prioritization decision, so you're like early on, I'm sure you had lots of ideas that you could have pursued and researched. How did you guys make the early prioritization decision? Like you were observing different behaviors, and then you decided that this behavior is one you wanted to target. How did you make that call?
Yeah, I think one of the early decisions we made is what was our default templates gonna be, and that came out through process of testing and validation. We launched a survey to many of our customers, just asking them, what is the content you present? And it turns out 80% of people were presenting some sort of content around recruiting, some sort of content around their org structure, organization structure, some sort of content around the cost around their employees, right? So we prioritized, okay, if that's what most people are presenting, let's just focus on building those tools out. And then there's as always, there's a long tail of 20% people working on sort of varied different kind of contexts. So we use that as a major input, and then we validated that throughout our beta testing process as well.
Okay. Questions?
What does that validation process mean to you? You're talking a lot about validation, and it's very clear you're worried about users in your tool chain, but when can you go to your stakeholders and say, I'm sure that this is going to win?
I think it's difficult, in the B2B world, it's very slightly difficult. You have to make a judgment call at some point, because we launched a beta product, and you cannot launch a beta product to 1,000 customers. You have to kind of limit that, and people are very reluctant. System admin, because in a B2B world, system admins control everything, right? So even if you launch something, it doesn't mean it's going to get to the end user. A system admin has to enable that before it can be applied to the end user, right? So they're kind of they control a lot of that decision making. So you have to get them on board. So that was kind of the first step, is getting 20, 30 customers, not only their end users, but also the system admins, to get on board, to understand whether they're going to enable that product for their users or not. And then just sort of talking to them, getting their feedback, making corrections. And then another problem we had was, when you launch something, you're kind of stuck in a quarterly cycle. So the next time you're going to be able to test something out is another quarter late, because we have this quarterly release process, and we cannot deviate from that because of the contracts we've signed with our customers saying that we're going to come with a quarterly release process, right? So yeah, it's a little bit of judgment. You kind of get the sense. You send them surveys, you test out the product, you see what they're saying, and you take that feedback and you say, okay, we are ready, if we have met most of the requirements, and you go from there.
Cool. So it does sound like there's some room for subjectivity there.
Absolutely.
And then you have to tell a story as you build a case for a release.
Yeah. I think a lot of, I think at the earlier point it was making that a lot of B2B decision making is very subjective. Because there's a tooling around A/B testing, experimentation doesn't really exist, right? While at Airbnb, everything is, is a feature you launched, what is the impact of that in core metric? I can see at the ERF tool, is the booking growth statistically significant or not, and you can make the decision just based upon that. In the B2B world, you just don't have that kind of luxury to make that. So you have to kind of use your experience, and you have to validate it to a variety of stakeholders, your end users, your system administrators, your sales teams, your solution teams, to arrive at that decision making.
Even in the more 2.0 model of SaaS, I think you also never really arrive at full certainty about something. And so I think there's also an art in terms of how you talk to the CEO about how sure you are about a product, right? So I generally try to set expectations that we're going to build small increments of value and release them. We release, probably usually we've tried to dial it back to 2 times a week, but we're trying to push increments of value. As soon as we have an increment of value that we think could actually, or some code that we think can provide value, we push it. Right?
Yeah.
And then we see how that works, and then we build on top of that based on what we see. And so I think that helps us build up to the big commitments of time. But some things are just bigger, right? You have to head in a new direction, and it's going to be more major workflows and things that get added.
Yeah.
And there, at the end of a validation process for us, we drive it through, the customer interview processes and things. But then we go into, wireframes and building wireframes. We test a lot of wireframes internally. We test a lot of wireframes externally. We go higher fidelity. We build prototypes, depending on the nature of the risk. And then at the end of the day, it's a conversation about, here's what we think we should do, here's what we think the risks are, here's the expectations. And my experience is a lot of times things that do succeed, they go flat first, right? And then they go up.
Yeah.
And so really get right out of the gate this amazing thing that you thought you were going to have. So it's better to build it up.
We could look at existing research data on whether that's a real feature, what data we have from existing research that can back this feature request up. And the other thing for us to look at is, okay, I don't want to build something that is too specific for a single business within Airbnb, but we want to build something that applies across Airbnb. Then our focus is on how do we make sure that there's demand of a particular feature across all the different business units, right? That doesn't mean, but platform also doesn't really mean that all we do is kind of intake from other customers. We own specific units of product that are consumer focused also, reviews is a big example of that. So we do traditional research on those aspects of that. So we'll do the same. We have a big research team that's constantly research. And we have a data science team that is constantly mining data to create many different frameworks. So right now they've created a trip quality framework to determine how we can measure reviews as a signal for booking. So we do that, so that part exists as well.
What are some best practices that you discovered for working with those teams, the research teams and the data science teams and things, sort of scoping the work that you want and getting the things back that you need to make the decisions you want to make?
Yeah, I think we have a consulting model at Airbnb where data science and some of these functions, design is a central function, engineering, where they're not kind of aligned with the business. So you kind of have to work with them in close collaboration. I think the success for them is kind of what I found is really defining the problem that you want to solve, right? I think that's kind of the key. What problems you want to solve, what outcomes you're looking for, and that's where kind of data science can come in and define how you measure the problem. So as a product manager, it's very important to for you to lay out the foundation of what you want to do and where you're coming from, and then use a data science partner to define what data set you're going to measure, what metrics are you going to measure, define the numerator and denominator of a specific metric, and how to set up your experimentation framework, right? But before that, you have to do your groundwork, you have to do your homework, you have to look at all the existing data to figure out what problem you want to solve.
Got it. Did you find that working in the consulting framework helped you get good at defining problems clearly? And
oh yeah, consulting background really helped me sort of crystallize and define problems. I wasn't really very good at that before, but consulting is very vague, where people would say, okay, I had worked in projects where where a client would say, oh, we don't know how our organization is structured, help us figure that out. And there's no like framework, right? So then you kind of start backing into that problem and start kind of breaking up that problem into small chunks. And that's where I learned a lot of that are. And we used to have this hypothesis-driven framework where you just create an hypothesis and you break down into different solutions and you come up with different solutions for different problems. So it really helped me think about any given problem, how to break that down, how to write different hypotheses for different problems, and how to define solutions that test this hypothesis.
Do you use that directly in your work at Airbnb?
We don't really say that,
yeah.
But the fundamentals are same, right?
Yeah.
We would say something like, how do we make our reviews better, right? And then you say, okay, what does better mean, right? And you start from there, and then you ask, who is it better for? Is it for the host? Is it for the guest, right? If it's for the guest, what does better mean? Is it user experience is better, or is the ability to give meaningful feedback is the better? Like, what is it that you're targeting towards? So it's the same process. It's just that we don't really call it that.
Got it. Questions? It's very good one.
I've got one.
There's a question in the back.
Okay, go for it.
No worries. I used to work at Lyft, and one of the challenges at Lyft was actually addressing a lot of the local market needs, because Lyft started off like very centralized and we started to decentralize. And I imagine it's kind of interested in maybe it's more specific to Airbnb, but how you kind of solve for that, because I imagine there's a lot of like regulatory issues and all the various markets.
Yeah, very similar issues. Actually, ours are probably, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but yeah, we have pretty severe regulatory issues, especially in what we call is like supply constrained markets. Like New York City recently passed a regulation around capping Airbnb nights. So what we are trying to do now is platformize. I love this word, platformize regulatory solutions, right? Where if you think about it, and it's true for Lyft, I imagine, is like the nature of regulatory intervention is very similar across markets, right? It will be something around night caps where they would say, oh, you cannot have more than 60 days or 100 days nights in a Airbnb listing. Or they would say you can list your primary residence but not your secondary residence, right? Or they would say in Paris there is weird rules that you can only do in certain neighborhoods but you cannot do in other neighborhoods, right? So these kind of things are actually similar across markets. So what we did was build a bunch of sort of regulatory products. Actually, our team builds that, where if a regulation passes in one geography, you can readily use that to educate your hosts, to get them registered, to figure out whether they're in that specific geography, whether they have a secondary market, quickly collect that data, and move fast with getting compliant in that process, right? So our goal is to retain as much revenue in those markets as possible. And then there's an operational component as well. So we are platformizing the operation side as well. So we have a playbook where if you go into a specific market and that has a specific regulation that are brought in, we just sort of see, okay, we need to reach out to hosts, we need to have some sort of incentive programs roll out, we need to give some data to regulators, what sort of data products we're going to build for regulators. So we're platformizing as much as we can so that any market that introduces something, we can just pick and choose and get up and running pretty fast.
My question was around buy, build, or partner. For something like entry to the unit, a guest's entry to the unit upon arrival, I think I had read, and this is old news, that Airbnb was at least informally working with August Locks, and I think was offering like a discount at least to their hosts. And for those that don't know, August Locks offer remote locks, so you can unlock the door basically through an app. How do product teams at Airbnb participate in the buy, build, or partner decisions?
I think it's a collaborative decision between not just product teams, but also business development, GMs, marketing teams, growth marketing, executives, strategy teams. So it's a decision that product team is just a stakeholder in, but it's not a primary decision maker. And the build by framework is probably the same across all companies, where you look at the trade-offs when you're acquiring something. You can move fast. You acquire, you either acquire a set of new users or a set of new functionality, but the trade-offs are it's a completely different system. It may not align with your values. It lives on something differently, and then you have to invest money into bringing those and unifying those things. While building, you build something from the ground up. You use your existing resources, but it's time constrained. So if you want to move fast, you acquire. If you want to get into a new market, a new geography, acquire a new set of capabilities, you acquire. So we have these debates on a regular basis. But just to answer your question, we are just we're a participant. We provide input, but we may not be the primary decision maker in many cases.
More questions? And I realize you can't really be specific here. When you've seen things not succeed at Airbnb, what do you think is usually the cause?
I haven't been there that long to see that many things that haven't been successful. But it's usually, it's kind of goes back to the basic principles, right? If you're not solving a real problem, it's not going to be successful. Oftentimes, especially PMs, we kind of go into a room and we think it's a great idea. It looks great, sounds great. I have built many products like that in the past, so fully guilty of that. And then you start trying to interpret research results and validation results as trying to look for confirming evidence, right? And that's where I've seen like most failures. I think that you think that's a problem, but it's not a real problem. And then the other part of that is often a problem is real, but the problem is not intense enough for people to actually change their habit or behavior on an enterprise, in a B2B case, for actually customers to pay for it, right? And so you may solve a problem. Evernote is a good example for me where, they definitely do solve a problem, but it's the nature of the problem is not compelling enough for me to pay a premium account for that service, right? So I think that's where most of the failures are, when you're not solving a problem, or B, you're solving a problem that doesn't really create a lot of value.
Do you think the experiences business idea is that solving a problem that's big enough out there, especially compared to the first idea that you guys had? Obviously renting homes and rooms.
Yeah, I think so. Research suggests that a lot of dollars in a trip is being spent on experiences and people doing things like that. So it's a good way to expand that and capture additional revenue share of that. And the other thing about that is it also helps people to have a complete trip. So moving towards that complete trip vision, where not only you're traveling somewhere on Airbnb, you're staying somewhere on Airbnb, but you're also booking this experience on Airbnb. And we can also offer something different. Like if you go to TripAdvisor, on the experience is called something else, I forget. Things to do. There will be like a lot of like generic trips. If you go to Paris, it's like, walking tour of Paris. There will be hundreds of this, but we believe we can differentiate that by giving you very authentic experiences, kind of just taking the same value prop you have in the homes business and getting that into experience business, right? So it's not something generic, but there's a lot of dollars in that market as well.
It's interesting that the experiences thing is like I have like a lot of thoughts about this, but basically I had like 2 or 3 friends fail at startups trying to do this, right? And so, but it seems to me, and I've seen this a few different times, that it's a matter of order of operations. So like Airbnb seems ideally positioned, if anyone can solve this problem, to solve this problem. In the same way that I think you mentioned that you were working with Lyft at one point. So we had another friend who was doing a startup that was actually trying to like work the whole carpool angle, but without the data that came from all the previous rides, that was a very hard product to try to build from the ground up. And so they basically scrapped it because they didn't think it was possible. And then Lyft did it 2 years later because Lyft had all the data and the maps. And what was really interesting for me in the Airbnb experiences is that I was in Portugal, and if you're ever in Portugal, I highly recommend the street art walking tour in Lisbon through Airbnb experiences. It was my first one. It was kind of like a gateway drug though, because it's like at first you're like, I don't know, it's a tour, but then you go on one, you're like, that was like super authentic. I felt really connected to the city. And now I'm like back home, like thinking about what I'm gonna do this weekend, like looking through.
It's almost like unintentional because sometimes I take experiences here, but really the focus was on like people when they're traveling on vacation. It's giving them, allowing them to experience something different. Experiences it's a tough business. No wonder like startups really struggle because supply acquisition is a really tough problem, right? There are many homes there, but quality experience, the number of hosts are limited, right? So it's very difficult to find really good, chefs who are happy to host an experience, or it's really difficult to find a musician who is going to host a concert, right? So the supply acquisition is a big problem there. And then vetting for quality, you have to kind of standardize that. It's much easier to vet a home for quality. Looking at pictures, using machine learning, you can kind of get a sense of that. For experience, you have to really, go dig deep. You have to really participate in that, get them, up-level them. So there's a lot of work going on in supply acquisition and experiences.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that...
And the other problem experiences is cross-listing is so easy, right? So you can list your thing in Airbnb or in Booking or TripAdvisor, right? So it's much easier that way too.
Do you find that people, so I think we actually talked about this on a different angle. Do you find that people with experiences are actually thinking that way? Because I think one of the things I always had a question was like, do people actually decide, do they actually go to an app to decide to plan their vacation? Or do they do it once they're there? Do they do it beforehand? I'm sure you guys have studied that behavior, and like, is that also a sticking point?
That's the hope. So we measure that like an attach rate of experiences to a home's booking. And we do see people booking experiences as part of their trips. But we also do see people booking experiences as independent without any trips. But our goal is to make that attach rate to a home's reservations much higher.
It's interesting because our CEO launched what eventually became Travelocity, and our CTO worked with him on that IPO. But one of the things they launched was the very first car rental online, and they launched it connected to a flight. They had done all this research, realized that everyone wanted to like book cars online. It was like just an obvious. They had all the partners lined up, everything. Yeah. And like 3 days into this, launched globally, like nationwide, no one had booked a car. Like no cars were booked. And he like went on. They actually went back and did the research, and they just realized they actually had the entry point wrong. And they realized that like at the end of the day, everybody wanted to book a car, and it was like aspirational to do it at the time of the flight. But actually, what the real behavior was like you booked the flight. And then later on, you're like, oh shit, I need a car.
Yeah.
Right before you go, and so they like moved it, and then all of a sudden it launched.
Yeah. So the flow was completely different than what they imagined to be. Yeah.
So many variables.
I mean, it's like one of the things that we deal with on a regular basis is this trade-off, like because experience is a growing business. So when a person searches on Airbnb, if you go and search Los Angeles, we try to like prioritize experiences on your search results, right? And that could have a negative impact on our actual hotels booking night, but that's a trade-off you want to kind of work through and discuss. How much you want to optimize the search results to promote a new business category.
Got it. Questions?
Yeah.
I have one that's kind of steering us away from experiences. So if we have more experiences questions, we might want to save it.
I'm actually not the right person to answer experience. I don't even work in that business unit.
Mine's more of a general Airbnb question, because Airbnb has a really strong brand, and I think that probably attracts a lot of the people who end up working there. But as a PM, if there's different PMs and all these different products and sub-products and features, how do you ensure that you're building things that actually all match a cohesive voice and you don't start to have a fragmented overall product?
Yeah.
Or is it just like the PM will make all these tiny decisions every day, and then the leadership will watch, and if it strays too far, they'll just kind of rein it back in and say that doesn't go with their voice?
I mean, what I've heard in the past, that there wasn't really a lot of controls like what you're talking about. So teams would build like competing products, right? And to an extent, that's going to happen. I know in Google, it happens quite frequently, right? But I think we are right now moving towards a much more sort of structured product planning and product decision-making process. Part of it is also how you organize, right? So we have now created a company-wide platform team. And so anytime you're building something, you can automatically think that I need some sort of platform component to that. And instead of building that on your own, now there's a platform team to help you support that. Right, so you don't reinvent the wheel. So we instituted a org change where we define platform teams and we define vertical teams. And we consolidated many different functions. The search teams we consolidated across organizations so that we have one unified search team and we are not duplicating work from other teams. And the other thing we did was we created a well-defined what we call as a planning process where we give our growth teams or business teams a certain amount of time to come up with their initiatives for the next quarter or the next year, right? And so once we have that initiative, what we do is we as a platform team kind of go and meet with all those different teams and understand what the initiatives are. So we can see around the corner if guest and host and experiences, they all trying to build something similar. We can say, hey, you're trying to build something, they're also trying to build something. Let us help all of you bring together. We build a basic platform and you guys build the features that are specific to you on top of that. So we do that. Actually, I just finished doing all these client tours last week, and now I'm kind of writing one-pagers that identifies the common thread across many different all these different teams that work towards. So that's how we kind of put the controls that we don't duplicate what we're making.
So do you guys also have group product managers or principal product managers of sorts that maybe own a particular product but also work across products to maintain consistency, or does the platform team actually serve that function at this point?
We have a hierarchy. They're managers, but they're really managers of product areas. So they're kind of focused on that specific area that they manage, and not so much across the company. And we have a big PM organization now, right? So it's very difficult for a few people to look across, and not having a dedicated function means there could be gaps. So yeah, I feel like we are the team that is de facto now responsible for cutting down and cracking down on duplicative work and building a cohesive story that binds all of this different product features that we developed.
Got it. So what's going to change in product management in the next 5 years? What are you worried about? And or what are you excited about, and what's going to drive it, do you think?
I think there are sort of few things that I think that will be interesting to see if it lands in the next 5 years. I think sort of going back to my original point, maybe there will be a SaaS 3.0 for B2B companies, which are going to be much more data-driven, and we'll have a new set of buyers and new set of buying process where things will be where it will enable teams to build products that their end users want versus their system administrator or versus their buyers want. Maybe there will be a world that we would see there. I think what you guys are doing is very impressive. I think that's where the world is going to go. Airbnb put in a lot of resources in building our own experimentation platform. And really, it should be commoditized at this point, and there should be tools available to quickly build something like that at that scale. I know Facebook built their own, Google has their own portfolio. So I think using data for research and A/B testing and experiment, I think it's probably gonna get commoditized over the next few years also. And then the third thing, as you can see now with Stripe and with Twilio. There's a lot of API building and outsourcing of common functions, right? I think that's going to get even more popular and universal, and we will have all sorts of features that we build in-house today available off the shelf through a different API provider.
Love that idea. Great.
There was a question on the back.
Yeah.
Yes, so going back, since you said the product is so big in Airbnb now, so how do you really get assigned work? Do you get to choose, or the leadership assigns you a particular project? Yeah.
I think there's a cascading process there where the leadership sets broad goals for the company, right? Our bookings growth, our platform quality growth, our performance growth, user growth, revenue growth. So these are kind of broad targets that are set at the leadership level, and then that translates into specific projects that we're gonna encounter, right? So for example, if one of the goal is to grow our supply of listings, right, then there's a team that is specifically focused on that, and they will incorporate some projects that will help bring more listings onto our platform, right? They will look at can we get into different types of properties, or can we get into different other kind of businesses that will increase the supply on that. So, and then once they decide that, and they will say, okay, these are the top 5 projects we're going to do, and then the guest team probably has a mandate to like increase user growth by 50% or 30%, right? And they would say, okay, we're going to do these 5 things to do increase user growth. So all the different teams are going to come up with their initiatives, and then we can take a look at that and say, okay, to help across the board of these different kind of goals, we can build a certain set of platform products that will enable these teams to go and accelerate. So that's kind of how the process works.
Cool. One more. Career advice. I don't know if Jonathan, you may have been about to get to this, but I think roughly half of our group is in product management already, and then another solid half is just starting their careers in product management or trying to shift disciplines into product management or something related. Because you did something similar, curious as to any tips you might have about how one could get into the discipline.
I think the best way to get into discipline, which I've seen both at Airbnb and at SuccessFactors and SAP, is if you are working in a different function in your company, try to move into product management in that specific company. If there's a PM function, I think that's the best way to do that, because people, they can vouch for you. And generally companies are open to recruiting people from different functions, right? So I would say if you really want to move into PM, and if you're in a company that recruits internally, network, meet the PMs, understand what they work, and try to move slowly closer and closer to that line of business, right? Maybe you don't get into product management, but maybe you can move into product marketing, right? Maybe you're going to move into infrastructure project management or TPM functions, right? So kind of as you move closer and closer to the PM function, I think that's the best way I've seen most people move into the PM. I mean, there are other paths, like traditional paths that people take from go to business school, and then there's a lot of business school recruiting in product management. These days, I think Google and Facebook both have dedicated grad school PM recruiting functions, so that's another way of doing it. I think those are kind of the 2 main things I kind of see how people move into PM.
There's also, I think also to augment that too, I think there's a Venn diagram of things you kind of need to know in product management. You need to have some experience with the business, and everyone falls different, right? In different places, the user, the customer, right? The business, the actual technology and the design, right? And so those are disciplines that you need to work with on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
And you're going to lean trends somewhere. So if you, for instance, have never built anything or designed something, you should learn how to design something. Just do it, because you get your hands wet. And if you if you don't know how to talk to customers, then you should run a big research project, and go validate something that you may want to build. I think so. Sometimes there's also a bit of being able to talk to something that you've done.
Yeah.
Even if it's not being done in your company, to just say hey, I had this idea, this is what I did, I went through this process, here's what I got, here's the recommendation I'd make. So you just have something tangible, right? And get your hands dirty.
Yeah, great point. And not everybody needs to have a technical background to succeed in product management. I happen to have one, but I've seen many PMs who do not have an engineering background.
Yeah,
it's not necessary.
Yeah. Cool. So as we wrap up, I guess I have 2 questions. If you have 1 to 3 books that you'd recommend that you and they could be books on product management, or they could just be books you've read recently that you just love.
I haven't really read a lot of PM books other than the obvious ones, which was the Lean Startup that everybody reads. I'm not sure if that. I think there's a debate right now whether Lean Startup is really the way to go, considering the amount of money many of the startups are raising these days. But that's I just read today Open Door raised $400 million, right? So that's one. I think I'm blanking on some of the blogs I used to follow. I mean, I follow Hacker News like crazy. I read that every day in and day out. If you're interviewing, one of the books that really helped me was Divide and Conquer. What was that? Decode and Conquer, right? Yeah, that book was really solid. There's another book by Jackie Bavaro, she heads up the PM function Asana. That book was really also provides a lot of great insight on the PM function. and interviewing for PM roles. And even beyond that, we used to read one of these case books in business school. I think that was also really helpful, which really makes you think about breaking down a problem, vague problem, and take that down and breaking that down. So if you have any of those Ace the Case, I think was the name. That was pretty helpful for me to get back into understanding how to deep dive a problem.
Great. What should we have asked? What should I have asked you that I did not?
I think you covered like everything.
Everything, your whole life.
There's like nothing. Maybe I can talk about like the relationship with engineering and PM. I think that's like a big part of that, right? Yeah, I think one of the things that product managers realize quickly is that you don't really own any function, right? Everyone is kind of helping you out in a sense, right? And engineer is like the biggest piece of it. So I think, I said earlier that you don't really need a technical background to become a product manager, but I think at least having an understanding of technology really helps, right? Because often you're going to be faced with questions like, should I build this API or should I build that JavaScript, right? And you have to make a decision in many of these cases. So even without a deep technical background, it's good to have that basic fundamentals, like at least know what an API is, at least know what the trade-offs are, making those decisions that will impact. And it will also help you build credibility with the engineering team, because they are really the most critical component of your success, right? If your engineers move fast, if they build a great product, that's how you succeed. If they build a buggy product really bad, even though it's a great idea, not going to be successful. So that relationship is often like not talked about enough, but it's very important to have engineering buy-in as you become a product manager.